Welcome back to another in my back to school prep series. This one is 7 tips I've learned the hard way on planning for your homeschool year. No matter how well you think you've planned and you've accounted for everything, there are going to be changes. And so when there are, a lot of people will discover that seeing how far behind they are in ink is really discouraging. So use your erasable pens, erasable or your whiteout, whatever you like to do. My favorite erasable pens are the friction pens. I will link them below. They are my absolute favorite. I found them a few years ago and they are a staple. Things will change, and you know, inevitably you hear people say, well, I planned out my whole year day by day, and then week 2 you start getting behind, and then you've got all these plans that have to change. So what I like to do is make a list of I do it by month. I've also, this year I started trying it by week. We're gonna see how that works, but I do it by month. Let's say, okay, in this subject I want to be to this lesson for this kid, this month this lesson for this kid. That way I have a framework of where I should be to complete it within the year, but I don't have a set day by day, knowing that things are going to change. And so then once I have that, I plan, it depends, a few weeks out, the more detailed plans. By keeping that framework in mind means that when I do go to plan, that I know this is where we need to be and I can adjust for that. But if something comes up, you know, one day, 3 weeks in a row, I haven't completely destroyed my plans for the year. If you've been around homeschooling any length of time, you'll know that the hot curriculum changes, the hot planning style changes, some of those things may work for you and some of them may not. Don't be afraid to stick with what is working for you though. And don't be afraid to take the hot new trend and adapt it to make it fit your lifestyle. What would work for you? Several years ago, work boxes were a huge thing. I think they still are, but not like they were. Work boxes did not work for me because I would never have been able to have the space for all those and whatever. But what I did do was to adjust it so they were in files, which also kind of goes along with the file system one that was also a few years ago. That way, it just builds in time for you to get caught up with whatever you are behind. We've done it for a couple years now and it's worked really well for us. And if we don't have anything to catch up on, then I either just move on to the next thing or we take that time off. Either way, it helps to not ever get too far behind. This one, if you followed me last year, you probably know that I talked about that I had a lot of ideas for field trips, but I wasn't very good about implementing them. I had a whole list of ideas that I wanted to do while we had our one school year in Georgia, but most of them didn't happen. What I think was the biggest problem is that I didn't actually schedule them in. So tip number 5 is to plan your field trip days. Go ahead and get them into the calendar and just decide this day we're going to do this, rather than just making a list of places you want to go this year. Now, if that day comes and you can't do it that day, fine, erase it and go ahead and schedule the next day. But at least having it on paper is going to keep it in your mind that you need to actually go to it. This is especially true if you are newer to homeschooling and haven't yet figured out roughly what's going to work for you. But I mean, we're starting our 7th year of homeschooling, 8th year? 7th, I think. And I still overestimate what we can get done in some weeks. And it just puts me behind. So, kind of whatever you think you're gonna do, back off a little bit. If you think that you're gonna be able to average 3 pages a day of something, you know, if your goal for the week is 15 pages, maybe scale that back to 12 or 13, especially in the beginning of the year. As you get later in the year, you'll have a better idea of what's really going to work for you and what's really going to work for your kids and what is actually going to get done. But especially in the beginning of the year, go ahead and plan a little less. There's always time to catch up later if you need to. Whether it's a different curriculum, whether it's the planning system you have set up, whether it's the schedule. One of the best things about homeschooling for me is the flexibility. And that includes the flexibility to say, this is not working, I'm not going to stick with it. Now, there are a lot of times when adaptation, you need to try to adapt before you actually completely ditch it, which I highly advocate. But there comes a point when it's okay to say, this is not working. It doesn't make you a failure, it doesn't make your kid a failure, it doesn't make there's no fail about it. It just is. So when that point comes, don't be afraid to just say, this isn't working, and restart. So there are my 7 tips that I've learned the hard way on planning for our school year. If you have a tip that you have learned the hard way, I'd love for you to share it below. Yeah, thanks for watching.